Ready. Freeze up.
Smell that black powder.
Yeah. Sulfur.
Sulfur, yeah.
Alan, take him around a couple of times before you fire. We've only got one more. Company, left wheel, torch.
So, can I ask a favor if the choir could stand down in front here?
I'm going to take a selfie with all of us. Right down in front. Yeah, I'm going to face the crowd. Everybody ready? Okay, did my best. Thank you guys, great job. So I need to recognize several sponsors and partners and individuals for making today's celebration possible. This lecture and the Destination Groton Committee's development of our new audio history tour, which we're going to unveil today, was made possible with significant financial contributions from Lawrence Academy and Groton School, and also the town of Groton's commissioners of the Trust Fund. I particularly want to thank Rachel Majeski. I know you're here somewhere. There you are, Rachel. Raquel, thank you. And Dina Mordeno. Where are you? Thank you.
Directly, she's good.
Oh, is she behind?
Yeah.
Wherever you are. Thank you very much for helping to make this happen. I also want to thank the Prescott Community Center, and in particular, Lang Fang Murray, whom I believe came up with this idea to have this lecture. So when you see her, if you know her, thank her for the idea. Several others collaborated with the Destination Groton Committee as well, and they're certainly deserving of a mention. Our town manager, Mark Cadet, he was a lot of help. The Groton Dunstable School District, the Groton Inn, Dolce and Mark, and you guys are going to experience their wonderful treats after this with a reception. And make sure you go in there to her shop and tell her thank you for everything she gave us. The Groton Business Association, the Neshoba Valley Chamber of Commerce, the North Central Chamber of Commerce, the Groton Channel, the Groton Public Library, the Women's Club, the Noah Gallery, the Center, Council on Aging, certainly Joshua Vollmar, who is our guest speaker tonight and did a lot of collaboration with us, along with the Groton History Center, and I'd be remiss in not mentioning Barbara Scofidio and Karen Barasano. Where's Karen? Is she around? Is Barbara around? Okay, well, thank you both. Really appreciate your help. Thanks, Karen. Thank you. So our first speaker today, her name is Becky Pine. Becky and her husband Bob have lived in Groton for 51 years. Been around a long time. They live on Hollis Street. And Becky is beginning her 9th year in serving on the Groton Select Board. And she was also on the Groton Dunstable School Committee for quite some time too. She has always had a big interest in history and how people have lived their lives earlier in time. And so I'm going to ask Becky to come up.
Thank you, Jeff. I am honored to represent the Groton Select Board and welcome you all here today. And just a little fun fact that I just learned in talking with Joshua. There has been a Board of Selectmen governing this town since well before the American Revolution, soon after it was actually settled. And it was, of course, a Board of Selectmen because it was always just men. Until sometime in, I believe, the late 1970s when we elected our first woman selectman, Loretta Moen. And after that, we had one woman on the board quite frequently until 8 years ago when 2 women were elected to the board. That would be me and Allison Manoogian. And within that first year, we brought a proposal to the town meeting, our grassroots, purest form of democracy, and the town meeting voted to change the name to Select Board. So that's what I am a member of today. So this is a day to remember and celebrate the amazing, world-changing actions of the people who live right here in Groton and in all of the British colonies along the East Coast, who are willing to risk their lives in a time of great turmoil, when the population was divided and dismayed over the actions of the demanding king who governed them. With courage and determination, they succeeded at overthrowing the British Empire, and then went on to create a new country with a brand new form of government, a democracy, where instead of an anointed monarch, emperor, or czar, the people hold power. The defeat of the British forces by the ragtag Minutemen militias and the creation of the United States of America with its government of the people, by the people, and for the people is unequivocally recognized as a significant advance in civilization, not just in our country, but all around the world. But at the beginning, there was no guarantee that the new government would succeed. Ben Franklin is said to have quipped, "It's a republic if you can keep it." The fact that we have kept it for 250 years is worth celebrating. Congratulations to all of us. But Franklin's words are a stark reminder as we look around us today. In 2025, our country is once again in a time of turmoil, with the population divided about the government we are living under. Some see our current president as a hero, saving the country from destruction. Others see him as a dangerous risk to our democracy. All of the world is watching, and no one yet knows how this situation will be resolved. Let us hope that Groton and our entire country will rise to the moment with the same level of courage and determination as those long ago Groton residents we are celebrating today, the farmers, merchants, and town leaders who left their fields and families to fight the American Revolution. And let us hope that when future generations look back on this period of political division and upheaval in our country, they will see the outcome of this era as unequivocally positive. Happy birthday, America. Congratulations for 250 years of success as the world's leading democracy, and may we be able to keep it going for another 250 years. Thank you.
So, Margaret Scarsdale was next. Where are you? All right. There she is. I'm going to tell you that Margaret has been a tremendous ally of ours, along with Dan Senna and other representatives and senators, that are involved with us. Margaret has been very, very generous with us and helped us with insight into the State House and to get visibility and thus funding and grants and so forth that are in play. She's been wonderful. But a little bit about her. She's a resident of Pepperell, and she began her tenure at state representative in the 1st Middlesex District in January of 2023. Prior to her role in state legislature, Margaret served as the chair of the Pepperell Select Board, in addition to her other community work. She's fueled by passion and community and economic development. Margaret has worked hard to advance policies, and programs that support the small towns in the 1st Middlesex District, with a focus on building and sustaining vibrant communities. Help me welcome Margaret Scarsdale.
Good afternoon, everyone, and what a wonderful occasion that we are here to celebrate today, commemorating the actions and efforts and sacrifices that ultimately led to American independence and to us being able to celebrate a 250th celebration. So thank you to everyone who made this day possible, and if we're being factual, which I do want to be because I know there are many historians in the House, that list of thank yous goes back to Oliver Prescott and his 1755 resolve, to today to the Commissioners of Trust, Lawrence Academy, Groton School, Prescott Community Center, Destination Groton, and all the sponsors whom Jeff Gordon had mentioned for their generous and ongoing support. I have always been captivated by history because it is the story of how civilizations are born, how they endure, and sometimes how they become something else. Very few people tell this story better than Groton's own Joshua Vollmar, and I encourage you to read, if you have not already, his tour guide entitled A Rebel Town, Groton's Revolutionary War Sites. In this guide, you will see, as I believe, that history is not some dusty recollection of decisions and wars and victories or sometimes defeats, but it is alive with sacrifices and courage, with hopes and fears, and with faith, because no one knows in the moment how history will unfold. And certainly the Prescotts, the Sartells, Farwells, and Wrights, and thousands of others could not have known in 1755 how this battle with the greatest empire on earth would conclude. Joshua's tour guide brings us into living rooms and meeting halls, and it makes us privy to whispered conversations and to brave hopes. I also believe it provides the enduring lesson that history is made in every moment. And while we might glorify the brave marches to Concord and the defining battle at Bunker Hill, a true telling of history shows us that before those skirmishes, there were the people who took incredible risks, gave everything in some instances to meet and plan for this future that they could not know, but of which they dreamed. History teaches us that we are always at a crossroads, that the present always ebbs and flows into the future. And it's why there's that famous saying, those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it, because history is not static. History teaches us more than anything else. I hope these 250th celebrations teach us more than anything else that democracy is not some static ideal, written on pages or carved into some distant past. Democracy is a living, breathing thing. It is made, it is sustained by the breath, the voices, the actions of those who speak up for it, stand up for it, and defend it. History is alive with lessons of the ebb and flow of these breaths, these voices. America was born from these voices, from the courage of Groton's sons and daughters in those certain times, in those dangerous times when a king dared to say that he would rule. May we never lose our voices, and may we continue to be courageous, even when we know not what the future holds, and may we continue to understand how fragile democracy, that most powerful of forces, truly is. Thank you.
And next up is Dan Senna, Danilo Senna. And you guys probably know that he represents part of Groton 2 in the 37th district. So Dan you might not know, was the first Brazilian immigrant elected to the Massachusetts legislature. So before his time in the legislature, Dan served as Senator Jamie Eldridge's district director for 6 years, working to protect immigrant rights, ensure healthcare access, and make progress towards racial justice and climate justice. Dan was born in Brazil, and just at the age of 14, he and his mom settled in Acton, Massachusetts. He worked hard to achieve the American dream. Dan worked multiple jobs to put himself through Middlesex Community College and University of Massachusetts in Amherst, where he graduated with a bachelor's in political science. So Dan also met his wife, Melinda, who's also a refugee, a Cambodian refugee, at Middlesex Community College. So they both live in Acton now, and they have 3 young children. Welcome, Dan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that introduction. I was like, wow, they know more than I've given to them. I am honored to be here, and as was stated, I'm Dan Stana, and I want to thank the town of Groton and all of the organizers for today's event. I'm happy to be here with you to join for this celebration. I want to also thank Greg Sheldon, Becky Pine, the Lawrence Academy team, the commissioners of trusts, and all our sponsors and volunteers whose dedication made today possible. I also want to recognize my colleague, Representative Scarsdale, who I have the pleasure of working together to represent the town of Groton at the State House. I want to acknowledge the Minutemen, the Fife, the Drum Corps, the Groton Dunstable, Chamber, Choir, for reminding us how powerful traditions are in bringing communities together. I am honored to be here today to celebrate Groton in our fight for freedom as we gather to mark 250 years since the American Revolution. We also remember that our democracy was built on courage of ordinary people like our neighbors, farmers, teachers, whom took extraordinary risks for freedom. Many from Groton made incredible sacrifices, and some even gave their lives in the fight for liberty. The values that shapes our history, such as civic duty, local leadership, the community pride, are still very much alive here in Groton today. We see those values in the new generation, learning about their town's legacy, educators passing on these stories in events that unite community members. I am proud to be here to continue that tradition, working to protect the shared history while building a future where everyone can participate in civic life. I want to thank you again for inviting me here today. I want to thank the families, the students, the community members who showed up year after year to honor Groton's past and invest in its future. I look forward to continuing to work with you all to preserve our history and strengthen that still pride in our community. With that, that concludes my remarks today, but I want to thank everyone, all the residents here in Groton for being a partner. Because I can't do my job alone, representing so many residents in the district that I represent, the 37th Middlesex district, and has been an honor of mine to serve the public with honor and pride, to make sure that their voices are being heard at the State House. I want to thank you again, and thank you for that introduction. Thank you.
Okay, we're here. We're here for the presentation, so let me introduce Joshua Vollmar, a historian in town. Josh is a lifelong resident of Groton, researching, writing, speaking the local history since 2016, at a very young age. You can tell. Now, besides being such a great guy and just one of the nicest people on the planet, he's obviously very knowledgeable, and we're glad he's here. So he collaborates with the Groton History Center, Historical Commission. He leads tours down in Concord, at the old manse. He contributes to the Groton Memories Project. He regularly runs classes about local history at the Prescott Community Center and other venues. And one of the cool things he does on the side, he's kind of a historical consultant. I think many of you probably have had him or hired him to do work for you with your homes in town. He often works with as a historical consultant and documents the history of houses in the area, and often writes articles on local history for the Groton Herald. So please help me welcome Joshua Vollmar.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much. Thank you to everybody for coming out today. So we'll just dive right in with the topic, because this is a massive time for us here in Massachusetts. The biggest anniversary that we've had really in 50 years since the 200th of the Revolution. And so when we think about 1775, we obviously think about things like we see on the screen. These are drawings of what happened in Lexington on April 19th and the British marching into Concord on the same day on the right there. But for the people that were on the ground, as our prior speakers mentioned, it wasn't clear how the war was going to end. But one thing was clear by the end of 1775. The world would never be the same. The global and local had collided right here in New England to spark the American Revolution, and Groton was at the forefront, a rebel town in revolutionary times. So we're going to quickly cover the local lead-up to this momentous year before highlighting the actions of ordinary Grotonians 250 years ago, particularly on April 19th and the Battle of Bunker Hill. So that brings us to the decade of tension leading up to the Revolution. What was the town like in these years? Groton had survived its first 70 years sort of as a border outpost. It was on the frontier, so to speak, of English settlement here, and was on the front lines in wars that were going on between the English settlers and the Native Americans over territory. And through the exertions of townspeople who lost friends and relatives in the wars, the town had survived. And despite these losses, they felt that in the Puritan philosophy of the day, that God had destined them to survive and prosper. Now, this is an important thing leading into the Revolution. If they're destined to be here, they should do everything to fulfill that destiny. And it's also important to note that in these early conflicts, the mighty British Empire played no role. They had protected themselves. They were not protected by the King of England. And Groton, because of this, is very proud of its rights and liberties by the time that we're getting to the Revolution. And because of that, of course, will guard them jealously. The town was not alone in this. The cause of 1775 was best explained in very simple terms by a Danvers Minuteman named Levi Preston, who simply said, "We had always governed ourselves, and we always meant to." And the British government intended to change that, and they would not succeed. So when the British Parliament passes the Stamp Act, which is the first act leading up to the Revolution, in 1765 to raise funds from the colonies to pay for a recent war, in towns like Groton, this is met with revulsion. In response, Groton's town meeting, that old democratic form of government that we still have, passes one of the first official condemnations of British policy from any governmental body in the colonies. With rousing rhetoric, it urged all actions necessary so that, quote, posterity may never have reason to charge the present time with the guilt of tamely giving away the unalienable rights and privileges of the people of this province. This resolve was written by Oliver Prescott, a name we'll hear more of. Groton in the Revolution was led by the Prescott brothers, James, William, and Oliver. They were rich, well-connected, and political, and so because of that, they're basically the most influential family in the Massachusetts countryside during the war. But it's important to note here that the liberty that American patriots were referring to at this time was not liberty in the sense that we know it today. Slavery was an accepted fact of society. Women had pretty much no rights, and only white men who met certain requirements could vote. In 1775, liberty meant the ability of a society to govern itself, a right that Americans believed was guaranteed to them through colonial charters and centuries of practice. Groton, like other communities, responded to each new provocation from Parliament over the next decade. After the Boston Tea Party in 1773 resulted in the so-called Intolerable Acts, the battle lines were drawn. Groton formed a committee of correspondence that year to coordinate with the developing revolutionary network. Communication was really key for the colonists in the lead up to the revolution, and the committees of correspondence were the backbone of this network. The town also started stockpiling military supplies in a newly built powder house near the site that we are sitting in today. Extra-legal assemblies also began to spring up across the state because the British government in the Intolerable Acts had suspended the colonists' right to assemble, suspended their right to self-government. But the colonists did not pay attention. Instead, they started to assemble their own governments, and one of the first ones was sort of a county-by-county level. And in Middlesex County, which was the largest and most important county in the state at that time, Groton's James Prescott was the head of that nascent government. And in the autumn of 1774, this evolves into the Provincial Congress, and that's the state's revolutionary government. In essence, Massachusetts had already set up an independent government, the first step towards separation from Britain, months before the first shots are fired. So that brings us to the dawn of 1775. As the year began, colonists already knew that something was going to happen, just not where and when. The militia had been regularly training for years at this point because militia service had always been part of sort of the colony's social makeup. Everybody was required, every male between the age of 16 and 60 was required to serve in the militia. They would typically have quarterly trainings, but as these threats grew larger, they started training quite a bit more regularly, monthly, even weekly, as we 5. Now, as they're preparing, they realize that they need some troops that are going to be ready very quickly in case a threat emerges. And those are the famous Minutemen. This was also a long tradition in the colonies. In prior wars, they had also had troops that were going to be ready to respond at a moment's notice. It's just the term that's new at this point. But because they are training and being prepared to be ready at a moment's notice, they're able to respond with surprising amounts of force in a very short amount of time, something that the British Army and Command really did not expect from them, which is one of the reasons that April 19th, 1775 plays out the way that it does. Groton itself had one company that was composed entirely of Minutemen, one company that was half Minutemen and half not, and two other militia companies outside of that, while some Groton men also served in Pepperell's Minutemen Company. The rallying point for all of the Groton men was the common in front of the First Parish Church, where we were just watching the reenactment earlier. And when they met there, they could receive supplies from the town's stocks. And all of the Minutemen from the region were part of the regiment of Colonel William Prescott. Groton native, one of those Prescott brothers we mentioned. He lived in what was at the time the district of Pepperell. It became a separate town at the end of the war, still considered part of Groton at this point. The remainder of the militia were in the regiment commanded by his brother, Colonel James Prescott, here in town. The militia was regularly reassured of the importance of their role. On February 21, 1775, Patriot preacher Samuel Webster of Temple, New Hampshire, addressed the Groton men in a sermon that was shortly printed and became a rallying cry for the American cause. He exhorted them to, quote, "Put on the Christian armor and fight the good fight of faith, and then you shall assuredly triumph." But Groton did not have the support of its own minister, Reverend Samuel Dana. Now, at this point, these towns are still following the Puritan tradition. There's only one church in town, one minister, and he's actually hired and paid by the town. Church and town government are intertwined. It takes a while for that to change. And so the first parish church, which was given a quarter turn in 1939, looked something more like what we have up on the screen here. This is a drawing of it from before that. That was the church, built in 1755, that all town meetings gathered were going on in during this period. And that's the church that Reverend Samuel Dana was minister of at the time. And he was one of a small number of loyalists in town. Loyalists meaning loyal to the British crown. Dana felt that any armed resistance to British policies would have dire consequences for the colonists. Essentially, he thought they could not hope to win any war that started. Only 2 weeks after Webster, the Patriot preacher that we quoted before, had spoken, Dana addressed the town on Sunday, March 8th, in what became known as the Windy Sermon because of the weather that day. And it also sort of reflects the sentiments of the townspeople. In this sermon, he advocated non-resistance to the British government. Well, the town would not tolerate it. The next Sunday, he was barred from entering the church. And after he refuses to sign a statement taking back his opposition to the cause, shots were fired into his house, part of the old Groton Inn. And then not long after the war began, he was forced to resign from his position as minister, essentially for his safety. Although loyalists were rare in Groton, across the country, thousands fled to places such as Nova Scotia, reflecting the human toll of what has been called America's first Civil War, often meaning sibling against sibling divisions within families. And now we get to the big events. April 18th is really when the alarm starts. The British Army, in the month leading up to the beginning of the Revolution, had already made a few attempts to seize munition stockpiles that the colonists had, including up in Salem. Some people may have heard they had a reenactment of that up there a little more than a month ago. And these earlier attempts had all ended without bloodshed. But because of these attempts, the countryside is on high alert. They know something else is going to happen. And so those committees of correspondence we mentioned, they're keeping in touch regularly, using express riders for that purpose. The most famous express rider is, of course, Paul Revere, who we have up on the screen. On April 16th, just a few days before the battles took place at Lexington and Concord, Revere delivered a warning to John Hancock in Lexington that the British Army might soon be moving in to seize the stores that were then in Concord. Hancock brought this news to the state's committees of safety and supplies, who were then meeting in Concord. The second of those committees, the committees of supplies, included Groton leader Oliver Prescott. And in part at Prescott's urging, they voted to disperse much of what had been stored in Concord in terms of weapons and ammunition. 4 of the 8 cannons that were to be moved, as well as a large amount of ammunition, were moved here to Groton's powder house under the care of Oliver's brother, Colonel James Prescott. And the cannons arrived here on the evening of April 18th. Well, you can imagine this created quite a stir. Everybody is suddenly wondering what's going on, and an emergency meeting of the town's militia was called. A young Minuteman, Nathan Corey, later recalled that he was plowing a field when he got word. He immediately went home, grabbed his gun, and went into town where the men were debating whether to go to Concord at once. They take a vote, and the majority favors waiting for more information. But Corey and a few of his comrades, numbering about 9, decided to go anyways. They traveled through the night by the light of torches, arriving in Concord around daybreak. Meanwhile, Paul Revere had set out from Boston after receiving word from Dr. Joseph Warren, another revolutionary leader in Boston, that the British Army was marching towards Lexington. He had to cross the Charles River in a small rowboat, passing near the British Navy warships in the harbor. He wasn't discovered due to the skill of the 2 men that were rowing him, one of whom, Joshua Bentley, later lived in Groton and was laid to rest here in the old burying ground. Revere would be captured that night after warning John Hancock and Samuel Adams in Lexington, but he set off the network of express riders, and dozens of men carried his message to towns throughout eastern Massachusetts and beyond. Some of these men had been trained to be express riders, some just took up the mantle on a whim that night. Dr. Samuel Prescott of Concord, a second cousin once removed of Groton's Prescott brothers, carried the message through Concord to Acton, where another rider, Edward Bancroft, set off on the Great Country Road, today's Route 119, heading towards Groton and warning Littleton along the way. So the day of destiny had dawned. April 19, 1775, one of the most momentous days in world history. While riders charged forward in the early morning hours, the British Army, initially delayed, had run across a contingent of Minutemen on Lexington Green. After a shot went off, opened fire against orders, killing several Minutemen and dispersing the rest in what is now known as the Battle of Lexington. They continued towards Concord to destroy the stores of weapons and ammunition, including what had already been moved to Groton the day before. In Concord, the militia ended up taking a position on a hill on the west side of the Concord River. So we have 2 pictures here of sort of looking up towards that hill from the day of the battle, from an eyewitness who drew it on the left, and a picture that I took on the right, how it looks today. And so the Minutemen have gotten this high ground on the hill across the river, and they're waiting to see what the British Army does while they're also waiting for reinforcements. They have received word that something happened in Lexington. They don't know exactly what. But as the British regulars arrive and began searching the town, more militia companies, Minutemen companies from surrounding towns arrive, join the Minutemen that were up on the hill there, and they end up increasing their numbers to about 400. Nathan Corey's band of Groton men that had traveled the night before were among them, and would have witnessed the debate over what to do when a contingent of British regulars crosses the North Bridge right at the base of the hill and then heads on to search the Barrett farm, leaving about 95 British regulars to guard the bridge. The decision to actually act on this situation was made after seeing smoke rising from the village of Concord, leading the men to think that the British were burning the town. In truth, they had been burning weapons and ammunition out on the town square, accidentally caught a building on fire, and even helped to extinguish it, but it sent up enough of a cloud of smoke that it looked like they were burning down the town. So the Minutemen and militia companies march in formation down the hill, sort of where you see the dust sort of coming up in that picture. You can imagine them marching down that path towards the bridge. At that point, they are marching down in formation. The regulars at the bridge, the British regulars that are left there, they're a bit of a disorganized bunch. They've just had a long march, 2 hours overnight. They had gotten soaking wet early in the march. Plenty of things going wrong for them that day. And so essentially they're completely disorganized and scrambled, and they start to try to pull up the boards on the bridge. Then they just run back to the other side to take cover. And again, without orders, some of the British regulars open fire. And the second volley that they fire off hit 2 militiamen, one of whom, Captain Isaac Davis of Acton, fell dead on the spot. One of the commanders of the Minutemen, Major John Buttrick of Concord, then cried, "For God's sake, fire," marking the shot heard round the world, as termed by Ralph Waldo Emerson some 60 years later. Now, why is it called that? This was the first time that a colonial officer had ordered his men to fire on the king's troops, an act of open treason. So there was no going back now. Nathan Corey and his comrades were the only men from as far away as Groton to witness this world-changing event. But the Battle of Concord, at least the part at the North Bridge, was over within a few minutes as the British regulars fled back to town. But across Massachusetts, men were on the move in great numbers. Which brings us to the Battle Road. Around 6 a.m. on April 19th, Edward Bancroft rode into Groton on horseback with the message started by Paul Revere. He quickly informed Oliver Prescott of the situation, and Prescott jumps on his horse, gallops down Old Air Road. He lived at the head of Old Air Road on Main Street, and gallops down Old Air Road to the farm where Samuel Lawrence, a corporal in Groton's company of Minutemen, lived with his father. We actually have a picture over there on the right of what that house looked like. It's no longer present, burned in the early 20th century. As recounted by Lawrence's son, Prescott, quote, came to the house on horseback at rapid speed and cried out, "Samuel, notify your men, the British are coming." My father mounted Prescott's horse, rode a distance of 7 miles, and notified the men of his circuit, and was back again at his father's house in 40 minutes. Throughout town, the word spread like wildfire, and soon militiamen were massing on the common out in front of the First Parish Church, giving it its present name of Minuteman Common. The confusion, fear, and determination of all those gathering that day must have been palpable. Captain Henry Farwell's company of 55 Minutemen, including Samuel Lawrence, was the first to depart. The town selectmen, including Oliver and James Prescott and militia captains Asa Lawrence and Josiah Sartell, were distributing supplies from the town's stores to any of the militiamen who might need something extra before they headed out. In total, they supplied extra weapons, ammunition, etc. to 94 Groton men that day, 44 of whom were Minutemen. In total, 185 Grotonians marched towards Concord that day, representing well over 10% of the town's population, which was a little over 1,600 at the time. Very significant for a town this far from the coast at the point, but regardless, the turnout is enormous. And 81 of those 185 were Minutemen, but more remarkable, 14 of them had responded without even officially being in a company. Supposed to be in the service, but they responded anyways. A bit of local rivalry injected a lighter note. Colonel William Prescott's Pepperell troops marched into Groton so quickly that some of the last militia members were still receiving supplies, causing his brother Oliver to quip, "This is a disgrace to us." Although the Pepperell men did need to be armed as well. Captain Farwell's company, the first to depart that morning, made haste to Concord. After the battle there, the British regulars who had been searching the town regrouped in the center and began to march back to Boston. Leaving the center of town, they were met by a group of Minutemen at Merriam's Corner, and that launches the next phase of fighting along what becomes known as the Battle Road. Essentially, they're chased by Minutemen and militia companies all the way back till they get to the neck leading into Boston. So it's quite a long day of battling for all those involved. So meanwhile, the Battle Road has begun, but Farwell's company has come at great speed. They arrive in Concord around the time that the battle breaks out at the head of Battle Road at Merriam's Corner, and they end up catching up with the British regulars along the Battle Road at what is typically referred to today as Bloody Angle within the Minuteman National Historical Park today. And they were the first troops from as far west to arrive and would be among the men hounding the retreating British column as the day went on. One member of Farwell's company, Corporal Amos Farnsworth, wrote in his diary that the British were, quote, forced to retreat, though they were more numerous than we, and I saw many dead regulars. In Lexington, another British column arrived to relieve the first. The fighting intensified throughout the day as the militia chased the King's troops back towards Boston, while some Groton men who were on horseback kept up the pursuit during that period. Farwell's company, among some others that had come larger distances, stopped at Lexington for the day. And with that, the war had begun. But the impressions formed on April 19th shaped how the conflict played out. There were, before this time, the British Army, if you took any British soldier off the street and asked them what they thought about Americans, they would have had basically contempt. They thought they were completely disorganized, rabble, they wouldn't put up any resistance. I mean, there was all of these types of quotes that you can find from British leaders as well as British soldiers on the ground during that period. But suddenly, after seeing what happened to the column that they sent out on April 19th, they became very much afraid of these pernicious men who hounded them with guerrilla tactics and would apparently do anything for their cause. One incident in particular was used by the British military and press to try to portray the Americans as savage. In the immediate aftermath of the battle at the North Bridge, a lone American ran across a wounded British regular lying in the road calling for help. Armed with an axe, the American, whether from fear, rage, or a combination, slammed the hatchet down on the regular's head, crushing his skull. Afterwards, the British regulars who had been across the river at the Barrett farm found the dead man, and rumors began flying. People in Concord later tried to pin the blame for this on an enslaved man named Frank who lived at the old manse next door to the bridge, but everybody knew the real culprit. It was a 20-year-old Groton native and Concord militiaman with the almost unbelievable name, Am I White? Yes. That first name is a biblical name. It's spelled A-M-M-I, but pronounced Am-I, and his last name is White. Yeah. And this single act from one American did as much as anything to shape British opinions of Americans as the war began, both the British Army here as well as Parliament and even the King back in England, who all heard this story through the press. By the end of April 19th, the lines were drawn. American militia began setting up camps around Boston where the British Army remained holed up. But what would happen next? So, we're going to take a brief time to come back to Groton, and then we'll head back to the area around Boston to hear about the next battle. But first, it's time to recognize some people who don't always get all of the credit: the women of the area. Women played key roles throughout the Revolution, and that was never more true in the tense months following April 19th. In one story, Groton native Susanna Parker, who we have over here on the left in her later years, she later married Samuel Lawrence, that Minuteman, and lived in town for the rest of her life. But she was living in Concord in 1775, and she managed to assist the Patriot cause after April 19th precisely because she was a woman, which allowed her to secure a pass from a British officer to enter Boston. For months, she went in and out of Boston with mail sewed into her pockets on her clothes, allowing communication between patriots in Boston and the countryside. Within Groton, other women were determined to do their part to defend the area once the militia marched off to war. A group of about 30 or 40, led by Prudence Cummings Wright of Pepperell, formed an informal militia company which became known as Prudence Wright's Guard. Now, we have over here a drawing that some say is of Prudence Wright. There's no portrait that's definitively known to be of her, so this is sort of the best that we have. There were other 19th century artist renditions of what this event may have looked like, but regardless, that's what we have to deal with today. Again, women not getting the credit and not having a portrait made of them. And so Prudence Wright's Guard They're gathering whatever weapons they can find, and they actually dress in clothes borrowed from their husbands and brothers to fool any who might see them from a distance. And the names of two Groton women who were part of the Guard are known, Susanna Quayles and Sarah Hartwell Shattuck. The second of them, Sarah Hartwell Shattuck, she was second in command of the company. Later on, her husband, Job Shattuck, who was a soldier at the time, became notorious for his role in Shays' Rebellion, but that's another story. Knowing that there might be British spies in the area, the Guard decided to keep watch over a vital transportation corridor, Jewett's Bridge, one of the only bridges to span the Nashua River and a key route south from New Hampshire. It was located where the Pepperell Covered Bridge is today, but was considered to be in Groton at the time. Essentially, East Pepperell, everything on the east side of the Nashua River, was part of Groton completely until 1857, and even the part on the west side of the Nashua River was still considered to be a district of Groton at this point, so Groton had paid for the bridge. So it's sort of like Groton gets that, although there's the monument in Pepperell, so they usually get the glory. The Guard actually remains by the bridge for several nights. On one of those evenings, two figures approach on horseback, coming down from New Hampshire. Seeing the group, one turned around, but the other was stopped and searched. British dispatches heading to Boston from Canada were found in his boots. He was soon identified as Captain Leonard Whiting of Hollis, New Hampshire, a well-known loyalist. It was later claimed that Prudence Wright, while visiting a loyalist brother in Hollis, New Hampshire, overheard a conversation with Whiting in which plans were discussed to bring a British force to Groton because the town was such a key rebel stronghold. We don't know for sure if that's accurate, that sort of oral tradition that was passed down. But it does go to show how influential Groton was in the cause during this period. The Guard delivered Leonard Whiting, that loyalist, to Groton leader Oliver Prescott, and he was kept in the town lockup, earning this band of heroic women a place in history as some of the first to perform military service for America. And now we move on to the second battle of the Revolution, one that you probably have not heard of. It's called the Battle of Chelsea Creek, taking place on May 27, 1775, about a month and a half after April 19th, and a little more than a week before, 2 weeks before the Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17th. So for the troops from the countryside that had come down and camped around Boston, there was really no knowing when the next engagement would take place. As it happened, this second battle took place just a few weeks later on May 27th, and Grotonians end up being central to what became a morale-boosting victory. It wasn't as significant strategically, but it certainly helped with their how they felt about their cause. At the time, American forces are attempting to secure land and resources around Boston Harbor. So essentially, they don't want the British to come across the harbor from Boston, land somewhere, and be able to pick up a bunch of food or tools, etc. And so they're trying to basically round all that up, keep it safe. And so a detachment of forces led in part by Captain Asa Lawrence of Groton and including several men from town were dispatched just after midnight on May 27th to round up cattle and destroy resources that could be used by the British on Noddle's Island and Hog Island, which are within Chelsea today. It's sort of, the land's been filled in around there, so they're not islands anymore, but that was, it was already part of Chelsea at the time. Now, the picture that we have over there on the right is of Captain Asa Lawrence's house on Lowell Road that is today called Scarlet Hill Farm, still exists, looks much like it does in that picture. Now, to return to that evening of May 27th, as the Minutemen are sort of gathering up these resources, the British soon become alerted to this activity, and they send a schooner called the Diana up Chelsea Creek to bombard the Minutemen, while they also sent some troops ashore to pursue them. And Amos Farnsworth, a Groton soldier who we quoted before on April 19th, wrote, quote, "We had a hot fire until the regulars retreated." And the Diana continued to fire on the American forces throughout the day, but the tide began to recede. And so this is an old sailing ship. it can't maneuver very quickly. And so with the tide coming out pretty quickly, it actually gets stuck on a sandbank, essentially. And so it calls for help, and the British are trying to scramble ships to go in and sort of rescue it. But meanwhile, the Americans have seen their advantage, and they immediately start to head on board. The charge was led by Captain Asa Lawrence of Groton, and the American forces get on board. The British that are left on board flee. They take everything of value, particularly the cannons, and then, as Farnsworth wrote, quote, "We set fire to her and consumed her there." And so the painting that we have here, 19th century rendition of what that might have looked like. The cannons that were taken from the schooner were used at Bunker Hill, where Captain Asa Lawrence commanded a company, and he brought one back with him to Groton, where it remains to this day. Now, on to the second main event after April 19th, Bunker Hill, June 17th. This engagement is perhaps the most memorable of all. Groton native Colonel William Prescott, who, as we said, was living in what was then the district of Pepperell, played the central role in the battle, and dozens of Grotonians took part. We actually have a picture over there on the right of the statue of Colonel William Prescott that exists at the Bunker Hill Battlefield Park to this day. And the day before the battle, American commander Artemus Ward of Shrewsbury sent Prescott, who is actually his cousin-in-law, helps to have connections, with 1,000 soldiers to build fortifications on Bunker Hill in Charlestown, fearing that the British would soon make an assault. Prescott decided that Breed's Hill would be a better strategic location, and overnight his men turned it into a fort. So if you ever hear this whole Bunker Hill, Breed's Hill thing, it's because Prescott made that decision, so we can thank him for it. The next morning, British commander Thomas Gage is alarmed when he sees what's going on, and he asks Americans loyal to the British if they knew the commander. Well, one said he knew the commander well, for Prescott was his brother-in-law. Abijah Willard of Lancaster, who was married to the Prescott's only surviving sister, stood on the other side that day, reflecting the divisions in families seen throughout the Revolution. "Will he fight?" asked Gage. Willard replied, "Yes, that man will fight hell, and if his men are like him, you will have bloody work today." Indeed, Prescott, who was in sole command of the American forces that day, was a key reason their morale held. Early on, many were ready to run as the British pounded the hill with cannon fire. But Prescott, who had quite a commanding figure, jumps on top of the earthworks in full range of all of these cannonballs that are coming down. He walks down the lane, calling to his men, and he tips his hat to the British in the harbor. With an ammunition shortage, Prescott did indeed shout, "Do not fire until you see the whites of their eyes," although he didn't coin it. After repelling the first two British charges, causing massive casualties for each of those British columns, the American forces ran out of supplies. The third charge saw hand-to-hand combat, with Prescott, one of the last men in the redoubt, parrying bayonet thrusts with his ceremonial saber as he retreated. That's why they show him with the saber in that statue. Bunker Hill has many stories of the bravery of Groton men. Samuel Lawrence, that Minuteman from April 19th, was injured slightly, and he later told the story of the serious injury to Captain Henry Farwell, Groton's Minuteman captain. A musket ball passed through Farwell's body and lodged near his spine. When a man came to carry Farwell away, word was passed along that he was taken for dead. As told by Lawrence, quote, "This report brought back the captain's voice, and he exclaimed with his utmost power, 'It ain't true. Don't let my poor wife hear of this. I shall live to see my country free.'" Well, yes. Well, Farwell's proclamation came true. Following the battle, the bullet was removed, and Captain Farwell did recover. Rather morbidly, he kept the musket ball as a souvenir, engraving 1775 onto it, and passed it on to his descendants. His sword, as a fun fact, was actually featured on Antiques Roadshow several years ago. 15 men from Groton were killed in the battle, 15, and that's the largest number from any town. Many more were wounded, and one, David Kemp, survived months of British captivity in quite poor conditions. However, the British lost far more, and William Prescott's bravery demonstrated conclusively that the Americans would fight and could do devastating damage against superior forces. Bunker Hill was the definitive proof that the colonies would never return to their prior status. So, we're going to cover just a few things later in the war, but it's time to take a moment to recognize the fact that it's not just white people who were fighting for liberty at this time. There were others besides the leading colonists that had no intention of returning to their prior status. Many blacks, Native Americans, and others fought in the Revolution on both sides usually it was to find some way to improve their status, and for many blacks who had been enslaved, it was a way to sort of strike a blow against the institution of slavery. Sometimes they were promised their freedom for fighting, but that wasn't always the case. Multiple black men from Groton and the vicinity served in the war, both voluntarily and otherwise, and a few were at Bunker Hill. One, Charlestown Eads, who would live in Groton during the second half of the war, had no choice in the matter. His enslaver, Isaiah Eads, enlisted him in his stead. For others, it was a matter of pride. That was the case for Barzillai Lou. A Groton native, his parents were both enslaved in town, but had bought their freedom by the time that he was born in 1743. After growing up in town, he moved to Pepperell and later Chelmsford, from where he served in the Revolution. He was famous in his day as a musician and served as the company fifer, a vital role for coordination. Nobody knew what to do on the battlefield if you didn't have a good fifer. At Bunker Hill, he kept morale high by playing "There's Nothing Makes the British Run Like Yankee Doodle Dandy." Now, we have up on the screen on the right side a portrait that was painted by Gilbert Stuart, who's famous for painting the portrait of Washington that's on the $1 bill. And this portrait is actually it's not known for sure who it is of. However, the most likely person that it's of is Barzillai Lou. And that's in part because he's holding the fife that he would have used as the company fifer. So even though we don't know for sure, this is the closest that we have to a representation of Barzillai Lou. And with the black soldiers at Bunker Hill, there were actually quite a number. And so if you look at the other painting that we have here, which is quite a famous painting of the death of Joseph Warren, revolutionary leader at Bunker Hill, in the lower right, behind the man that's sort of off to the side, there is a black soldier behind him. So they did make it into the painting, even though they should have been spotlighted more than they were. Meanwhile, Barzillai Lou, he continues to serve in the cause, and he was later chosen to play a very important role in 1777. Following the Battle of Saratoga, which is considered the turning point of the war because British General John Burgoyne was forced to surrender to the American forces, convincing France that it was safe to ally with the Americans, which was the decisive factor. So after the battle, they're having a ceremony for this sort of surrender, and Barzillai Lou is chosen to play the ceremonial music for that turning point of the war. And after the war, he moved to a farm in Dracut, and he actually founded a very influential and long-standing family that remained in the area for quite a long time. In later wars, like in later wars, blacks were not allowed to be officers in the Continental Army, but there were some units composed solely of black soldiers. And there's an interesting story that Samuel Lawrence, the Groton Minuteman that we mentioned, commanded one such company later in the war and credited their bravery with saving his life. In the end, the Revolution did usher in a change for the enslaved people of Massachusetts. The state adopted its constitution in 1780, and the Bill of Rights contained in it caused multiple enslaved people to sue for their freedom. In 1783, the Supreme Judicial Court decided that the state constitution had outlawed slavery. At that point, there were still 11 enslaved people living in Groton, and they finally had their freedom. But this is by no means the end of the war in 1775. This is the beginning of a conflict that the hostilities last 6 years. It's 8 years till they actually get the treaty officially ending the war, and it completely devastates America's economy. The resulting depression is so bad that by some measures it's worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s. After Bunker Hill, Charlestown was actually burned to the ground by the British, and many patriots from there, as well as Boston, which is still under British occupation, fled out into the countryside where they could be safe. And towns like Groton were allotted a certain number of Bostonians to support during this trying period, which lasted the better part of a year. The British remain in Boston up until mid-1776, when they decide to move to a theater further south. Mid-Atlantic at first, and then later on they go further into the south. But yeah, so essentially all these towns in the countryside are told you have to support some of these people who are fleeing from the British in Boston. But they also, as well as having these additional duties, had additional encouragement from the likes of Reverend Samuel Cooper, a well-known patriot preacher in Boston who regularly filled in at Groton's First Parish Church while in exile and while they were trying to find a replacement for Reverend Dana, the loyalist minister from before the war. Grotonians continued to play important roles as the conflict progressed. Moses Child, a longtime innkeeper in town, was asked in November 1775 by George Washington, recently appointed to be commander of the new Continental Army, to undertake a secret mission. Child and one other person were commissioned to travel to Nova Scotia and find out if that colony was in support of the American cause and what military resources they had. The mission showed that Nova Scotia was loyal to Britain, vital intelligence in the early days of the war. Many Grotonians continued serving throughout the conflict, and some fighting further from home. There were plenty that went down in the Rhode Island campaign, out in upstate New York, Fort Ticonderoga, Saratoga, as well as later on in New Jersey, and even further south, a couple went to Virginia. There were some that were at Valley Forge. So essentially we have representatives at most of the major events throughout the war. But there were others who served in key roles here on the home front. Most notably, Oliver and James Prescott, who filled some of the most important offices in the state. Oliver Prescott becomes the second highest ranking military officer in the state and is sort of in charge of organizing the army. And James Prescott is on the Board of War, which is all about raising supplies and money for the cause. In the end, more than 334 Grotonians served in the war, and many of them did not return. These were people who made these decisions without knowing how the story would end, like we were hearing earlier. That these activities, these actions that they took 250 years ago, upon thousands of people like them, won a war that would shake autocracy everywhere and prove to be an inspiration to all who have fought for liberty in the 2.5 centuries since. Let the determination of these regular Americans and Grotonians who stood on their principles 2.5 centuries ago be an inspiration for the possibilities of the future. Thank you very much. Thank you.
You know, one thing, I was not going to play Trivial Pursuit with this guy. No way. So raise your hand if you learned something. Stand up if you stand no, if you learned a lot.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
That was awesome.
Now I can introduce the tour, the walking tour. I can introduce the tour.
You want to do that now?
Mhm.
So,
Oh, and if I didn't mention, I forgot to mention, with the pictures on this last slide. On the right is the famous painting of the surrender at Saratoga, in which Colonel William Prescott appears, and then on the left is the Prescott Monument here in town. So I am very pleased to also introduce our new audio tour, which was alluded to earlier, Margaret Scarsdale graciously referred to it in her remarks. So this has just been released. Essentially, we have 16 sites around town that have to do with our revolutionary heritage. And we went through and I recorded a narrative about each site to give you a sense of what the history and significance of these locations are. And so you can listen to this from the Destination Groton website. It's destinationgroton.com/walking-tour, and go around town at your own pace. There are some sites that you can walk to, others it's better to drive to, but regardless, we hope that this can serve as a permanent reminder of Groton's role in the Revolution. So.